All right. Good afternoon. Welcome, welcome once again. You are in the right place. If you are at the MAL Initiative for Literacy and Equities Lunch and Learn webinar series. I'm Brandy Slaughter, and I support the MILE initiative with leading and coordinating activities around advocacy and outreach. As part of that, many of us that have been in the background, kind of planning efforts in that space, thought that some public education would be great. Like, what are the pieces of legislations? What are the programs? What are the things that are already out there operating that folks could use a little deeper dive to learn more about? And so, as a result of that, this Lunch and Learn series was developed. They're really focused on looking at policy and practice, which will improve literacy for Marylanders. And I am so thrilled that each of you are here. We don't want to prolong the hour. I want to give some time. And hi, Melody from Baltimore, Maryland. So grateful that you're here. We want to give as much time as we can to our speaker. And Karleen, one of the things we did not do in preparation for this webinar is you help me how to pronounce your last name. Now, I have Appalachian roots and I butcher it all, right? Like if there's not phonetics in front of me, I'm not good. So I'm not even going to play myself. I'm just going to say, hey, we have Karleen today, and Karleen can give you the proper pronunciation of her last name. Karleen is a board member of the Reading League Maryland. And as a state leader with Decoding Dyslexia Maryland, Karleen worked with educators and advocates for 2 years to pass the Ready to Read Act in 2019. Since that time, she's been working to help implement the law so that more children can become proficient readers. Karleen, now I'm giving you a whole new name. Karleen lives in Baltimore County with her husband, her 2 boys, her 2 dogs. Karleen, I am going to fade in the back. But before I fade in the back, if you have questions, audience, please use the Q&A feature. We're probably going to, respond to them at the end of the lecture. But that's the best way, either the chat or the Q&A feature, and we will get those to Karleen so that she can respond to your questions and your comments. We want to hear more from you as well. Karleen?
Okay, well, thank you very much. My name is Karleen Spitulnik. I was a Peterson and I married a Spitulnik. I couldn't convince him to take my name. So I gave in. But I'm here to, let me see. I'm here to talk about Maryland's Ready to Read Act and kind of looking at it from a parent's perspective. What do kindergarten and first grade parents and families need to know? So just so that you know what I'm talking about, I want to talk about 3 big ideas that research tells us about early reading interventions and screening, what the Ready to Read Act actually does, what parents should expect from schools. And then I want to talk briefly about how the Ready to Read Act can help school systems. And then I'll end with my big ask and how the Ready to Read Act can be improved so that it can be better, because nothing is ever perfect the first time out. So I'm going to just start with this quote and kind of lay the groundwork. I also am, I'm the mother of a child with dyslexia, and we figured it out when he was in 3rd grade and he was almost 9. And I think it's a really good thing that I did not see this quote. This is from research that was done in 1996. And they say 90% of children with reading difficulties will achieve grade level in reading if they receive help in 1st grade. And 75% of children whose help is delayed to age 9 or later continue to struggle throughout their school career. My child is now a senior, and he's actually doing really well. So I can tell you that reading instruction and interventions do work. So, keep that in the back of your mind. So I want to start with these three big ideas. And there was an article in the Reading League Journal. The Reading League is it's an organization primarily for teachers who are interested in how should they better teach children how to read. And so one of the things that the Reading League puts out is this journal. It talks about research, but I guess it's a little bit easier to understand for those of us who are not researchers. And this article talked about kind of old research that's relevant today and kind of explains why we need the Ready to Read Act. So the first big idea is that early reading difficulties are likely to lead to later reading difficulties. There's a researcher, Connie Jewell. She was in San Francisco, and she tracked 54 children from first grade to the end of fourth grade. And so she could look at the students who were struggling readers and those who were not. And she found that those students who were struggling readers continued to be struggling readers and never did catch up to their peers, which is contrary to popular belief, because I know I was told many times, oh, just wait, your son needs to, he's a late bloomer, he'll figure it out, which we know just is not true, and we can't expect kids to do that without reading instruction. The next big idea is, I kind of left something off the slide, but we know that we can identify children who are at risk using screening. That's been proven. But then when researchers took the kids who they thought who were at risk and gave them effective reading instruction, only 2 to 7% of those kids continue to have difficulty with reading. So I think that's huge, that we can teach kids how to read. It's also, the one thing that's missing, a lot of people heard this, but the problem is getting the actual intervention into the classroom to all students. So obviously this was research, and they were very specific about the instruction, so that's why they were able to get those results. But hopefully we can get something close to that in our public schools. And then the third big idea is that the earlier students receive interventions, the better they do. A kid who receives intervention in first grade does better than a student who waits till second grade to get those interventions. So again, that just shows you that we really need to start early and get those kids who need help, the help that they need early. So why did Maryland need this Ready to Read Act? And this was the slides that I was carrying around in Annapolis in 2018, 2019, when we were working on getting this bill passed. And you can see, if you look at all fourth graders, and this is on the fourth grade MCAP, which is the standardized assessment, 43% of students were proficient, which is great, but that means that 57% were not. If you look at kids in poverty, the stats are much worse. This is from 2018. I took a look at the 2023 MCAP data, and it's a little bit better. 51%, in my notes here. 51.3% of fourth graders were not proficient, which is lower. But for the kids in poverty, the number is still pretty high, and 69.1% are not proficient. So we still have a ways to go. Whoops. Oops. Okay. So one of the articles that came out in 1999, and then she repeated it in 2020, is that teaching reading is rocket science. It is complex and complicated. And I just wanted to give you an idea, if you haven't seen this before. I remember when I was trying to figure out what to do with my son when, I was like, what should I do? He's not reading. And I remember looking up phonics and trying to figure out what it was. That's how little I knew about reading. But this right here is a diagram that's been around for a while. It's called the reading rope, and it was developed by a researcher, Hollis Scarborough. She was a psychologist. She used this diagram to explain to parents all the components of reading. You'll see that she talked about the strands of a rope and how every strand needs to be kind of intact. And this is laid out into two different strands. There's the red one, the top one, which is the language comprehension strand. And that strand looks at things like background knowledge and vocabulary, all the things that you need to know to understand the language, whether it's spoken or written. And language comprehension, those skills are kind of learned throughout your life. I'm sure all of you are still learning things. My kids are teaching me new language and new vocabulary. So, but whenever teachers tell you that you should be reading to your child, that's the strand that you're working on. The bottom strand, the blue strand, the word recognition strand, is skills that a child generally learns kind of between kindergarten and second grade. It's things like phonological awareness, all the sounds that make up a word, decoding skills, sight recognition, so that when they see a word, they know instantly what it is and they don't have to sound it out. So that is the reading rope. Let me see. So onto the Ready to Read Act. It was December of 2017, and Decoding Dyslexia, which was a group of parents primarily with kids with dyslexia. There had been a dyslexia task force in the state of Maryland with recommendations, and Decoding Dyslexia sat on it. School psychologists sat on it. The MSDE sat on it, and they came up with all these recommendations. One of the recommendations was that all students be screened universally. And in December of 2017, the Maryland School Psychologists Association approached us and said, let's write a bill that calls for universal screening and intervention. So we sat down with the teachers union and the school psychologists and the psychologist and teachers, and we wrote this bill. Actually, not this one. This was the second year. That bill got all the way through both houses of the legislature, but there were amendments and the bill wasn't the same, so it died on the last day of the legislative session, thankfully. And I say thankfully because the first time out of the gate, the bill got amended and there wasn't much to it. So that gave us a second chance. So we spent the summer rewriting the bill. We spent the summer and the fall, talking to legislators and other policymakers and getting people up to speed on reading screening. And lo and behold, the bill actually passed that year in 2019. This is the bill signing. It was a great day. So we actually had two pictures. They had to take two pictures because we had so many people there that day. So I always like to share this shot. So I wanted to give you an idea of what goes into the law. And one thing you should know is that there's the statute, so what passed the legislature and what the governor signed, and then there are regulations, because part of the statute said that MSDE, our State Department of Education, was supposed to write regulations. So some of the law is what's in the legislation, and then some of it was modified a little bit in the regulations. So I've tried to make this as up to date as possible. So just as a summary, the whole idea of the act is that we need to screen and intervene. So beginning in 2020, 2021, every single kindergartner and first grader, as it turned out, in Maryland should be screened using a screener to see who's at risk. And one thing though about that year is, if you think about it, that was kind of like at the height of COVID, and teachers were actually screening kids on Zoom or Teams or whatever online platform that they were using. So I think we need to give people a bit of grace, because it's pretty hard to screen kindergartners who have never been in the school building online. So you kind of have to, give look at the results with that in mind. The next school year, because of the regulations, schools were supposed to screen students in first, second, and third grade if they were found to be at risk in the prior year, or if they were new to the school. So that's the screening part of the bill. And then probably the most important part of the bill is that if a student is at risk, they're supposed to receive supplemental reading instruction. And the parent is supposed to be notified of that. And hopefully with the supplemental screening reading instruction, the student who was at risk, that the screener will be proven wrong when the student learns more about reading and is no longer at risk. So that's the goal of the bill, to prove the screener wrong. So the screening instruments, screeners are supposed to be brief. It's supposed to take 10 to 15 minutes per student. It's supposed to be valid and reliable. Those are terms that psychologists use when they look at screening. So it means that the measure is supposed to say what it's supposed to say, and it can be consistently given. The screener is supposed to be norm referenced or criterion based, and it's supposed to be developmentally appropriate. And the screening instrument is supposed to target certain skills, phonemic awareness skills and processing, which we interpreted as rapid automatic naming. And then students are supposed to be screened generally 3 times during the school year. Generally it happens fall, spring, and winter. The school system is supposed to follow the guidance of the screener that's selected, and 3 times a year is pretty standard. And the initial screening is supposed to take place within 2 months of the start of the school year. And then who can administer a screening instrument? The law says a classroom teacher, a special education teacher, reading specialist, speech language pathologist, a school psychologist, and anyone else who's trained. The whole idea here was that a person should be giving the screening, and it should not be a computer. And then the second part, again, the intervention. The language of the bill says that supplemental reading instruction is supposed to be evidence-based. It's supposed to be sequential and systematic, explicit, cumulative instruction to mastery of foundational reading skills. And those foundational reading skills should include phonological and phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary, and they should support the development of decoding, spelling, fluency, and reading comprehension. So if you've been following reading instruction in the news at all, people keep talking about the science of reading. And the science of reading is basically that reading instruction should align with what the research has been saying. So any school that follows this definition would be following the science of reading. And if you if you look at this, the term phonological and phonemic awareness and processing is a little bit strange. That wasn't in the original language that was written, that was put in by amendment. So that's kind of can be the problem sometimes with legislation, is that things can be put in and taken out, and sometimes you get things a little strange. The other thing that got put back in, it was in the bill originally and it was taken out by the legislature, but was put back in by our State Department of Education because it's important, is progress monitoring. So if a student is found to be at risk and then they get supplemental reading instruction, you want the school to be looking occasionally at, is that student making progress? Because if they're not, you want to do something different. If they are, maybe they've caught up to their peers and you can stop the supplemental reading instruction. So it's a measurement procedure with the specified time interval. And MSDE came up with every 30 days at a minimum. Oftentimes progress monitoring can be the same as the screening. So for instance, if a student is struggling with phonemic awareness, every 30 days, you might give them another phonemic awareness screener to see if they're making progress. And then there are other components of the Ready to Read Act. Parents are supposed to be notified if the student is found to be at risk, so they'll be notified of the results, and then also what the supplemental reading instruction is going to be. There should be information on the local school system website. So if you go to Baltimore County's website or Baltimore City or Allegheny County's website, it should list what screening instrument they're using. And there should be some checklists about the early warning signs of reading difficulties. Another big thing is that there is an annual data reporting requirement. This was our transparency piece. We wanted to make sure that school districts were actually doing what the law said. So they need to report annually to the State Department, and the State Department needs to post this data on their website. So it's the number of students in the grade, the number of students who are screened, the number of students who are at risk, and the number of students who receive supplemental reading instruction. So ideally, the first number and the second number should be the same, and the third number and the fourth number should be the same. And this data is supposed to be posted by October 1st on MSD's website. If you go and search Ready to Read, you should come to the section where they have the data. There's a kind of a page specifically for Ready to Read. I checked this morning and it's not up yet. So they have, I guess, 2 more days. Then the other little things is that MSDE was supposed to adopt regulations, and they did. It took an extra year, but they were adopted in the summer of 2021. And they're supposed to develop and update resources on their website for the counties. And so that was supposed to happen by June 1st of 2020. And then every 4 years, it's supposed to be updated. Local school systems are supposed to select a screener, prepare their staff, train them how to give the screener and how to interpret it, prepare letters. And this was all supposed to happen in the fall of 2020, I guess. So things were a little bit delayed because of COVID, but I think that's just the way things go. So this is a part of this presentation that I've never given before. So hopefully this is self-explanatory. But I wanted to talk about what parents should expect. And a lot of this is what I've learned over the years about screening. So here we go. So first of all, screening is really important. It's the first step in preventing difficulties. oftentimes I know, like with my child, I was told, don't worry, he'll catch up. Schools used to take a wait and see approach, eventually they'll catch up, or else, when they're in third or fourth grade, we'll deal with it. But we're kind of trying to change how schools deal with reading so that we're preventative instead of reactive. It's also a sorting tool. It helps schools to identify the students who are likely to struggle so that those students can get some extra instruction, and that they know who to pay extra attention to. And really, this is giving everyone the gift of time. It used to be that students would get the kindergarten readiness assessment at the beginning of first grade, and there was never a standardized test that they took until the end of third grade. So that's 4 years of instruction that could have happened without realizing that a student was struggling. So by screening, we're identifying those kids early. Let me see. So the actual assessment, it's conducted one-on-one, so it's a teacher and a student, happens 3 times during the school year. And there are several measurements, several measures that a student will be given, and each one is 1 minute in length. They are timed. Not everyone likes that, but with reading, there's a certain amount of fluency that has to happen. If you can't remember what you read at the beginning of a sentence because it's taken you a long time to get to the end of the sentence, you're not fluent and you're not reading well enough. So that's why these measures are timed. There are stop rules. So if a student just cannot do it, the teacher can just stop the assessment. Obviously, that student's at risk then, but then you know that, okay, we need to start at the beginning with the student. And the measures align with the essential components of early literacy. And more importantly, these measures have been proven to be predictive of later reading skills. So I'll get to that in a minute. Some examples that school districts are using are Dibbles and Acadience. Some other common screeners across the country that I haven't seen so much in Maryland are Ames Web Plus and FAST. This is the Dibbles administration timeline. So you can see it's a little hard to see, but on the left-hand side, in kindergarten, the student would take letter naming fluency, phoneme segmentation fluency, nonsense word fluency, and word reading fluency. And each of these is a minute. So it shouldn't take any more than 5 to 10 minutes to get the child into the room and screen them and send them on their way. Acadience is a little bit different. The beginning of kindergarten, they only do first sound fluency and letter naming fluency. So it changes a little bit. I mentioned that these screeners follow the essential components of early literacy. So generally, when people talk about literacy, they talk about 5 components, and they're phonemic awareness, the alphabetic principle or phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and reading comprehension. And students generally start on the bottom with phonemic awareness and kind of build their way up to reading comprehension. Vocabulary is a little strange because you've got oral vocabulary and reading vocabulary or what you read. So it kind of, you learn vocabulary throughout. But I've listed some of those screeners and how they align with the components of literacy. So if a student is struggling with phoneme segmentation fluency, a teacher can know that, hey, I need to work on this student's phonemic awareness. If they're struggling with nonsense word fluency, then I need to work on their phonics skills and phonics knowledge. So the people who develop the screeners also develop benchmarks. So a benchmark is the lowest level of okay. So if you think about it this way, they've done the research so that they know that when a student does nonsense word fluency, they've looked at the research where they've said, okay, a student at nonsense in kindergarten, the end of kindergarten, if they score X on this assessment, then we've looked at them through like third grade, and they are able to do okay on their standardized assessment at the end of third grade. So that's the lowest level of okay. So that means that 70 to 85% of those students who are at benchmark are likely to be proficient readers with just normal reading instruction. Obviously, the higher above benchmark a student is, the better. Most of these, they have an above benchmark status. And those students, they're 90 to 99% certain that those students will be proficient readers. What we're concerned about are the students who are below benchmark. So there's kind of a 50-50 chance that those students will become proficient readers. So it's kind of a coin toss. So, we need to do something with those students. And then there are the students who perform well below benchmark. And those students are really not likely to do well unless they get intensive interventions. But again, this is why we're starting this early, because then you've got that benefit of time so that you can screen the student maybe a number of times and see maybe they just had an off day. But you also have time to, spend some extra time with that student on phonemic awareness or on blending or something like that. So, but I thought this was interesting to think about it as, the lowest level of okay. So if a student is at risk, a parent will get a parent report. This happens to be the sample data report, one page of the sample report for Dibbles. This is a second grader, and just to see, most of these screeners put things into colors. So green is the lowest number in green, or the benchmark number is that lowest level of okay. A student who scores below benchmark in the yellow needs a little bit of extra instruction. And then obviously the student who scores in the red, they need to take a better look at them. Ideally, what will happen is that all the students in a classroom should be in green. That's where we want everyone to be, and hopefully instruction will get them there. So what if your child is at risk of reading difficulties? Again, you should receive a notification letter from the school with a copy of the screening results. And that letter should outline the supplemental reading instruction, and they should get progress monitoring. So now what would I do if I got one of these letters? I guess I would make sure that I talk to my child's teacher. And oftentimes schools have conferences in November. I would probably ask to see those results of the screening, even if I didn't get a letter. You'd want to understand what your child's weaknesses are, and what the supplemental instruction would be. Talk to the teacher and get as much information as you can, and then ask what you can do with your child at home. They will likely tell you that you should read with your child, which is good regardless. But probably the weaknesses that the screener is showing are those foundational skills. So hopefully the teacher can help you get involved as well. Then one other thing, oftentimes schools use what's called a multi-tiered system of support model. And actually, I don't know that many schools in Maryland use it. They might use bits and pieces of it. But one thing that you should probably understand is that we think of reading, not special ed, but general ed reading in 3 tiers. So tier 1 is your general classroom instruction, and that's what every single student should get. Tier 2 would be those students, probably the students who are in yellow, maybe the students who are in red, at least for a little bit, to see how they do. Tier 2 is targeted small group instruction. So people who come from the special ed world are used to talking about interventions and different programs that students get for interventions. For tier 2, it might be enough that your child just needs a little bit of extra time and needs to hear about something a little bit more. So rather than getting a small group instruction with the teacher 3 times a week, maybe they'll get it 5 times a week, and that will be enough to get them into green. So that would be where your school would start. Remembering that if you start in kindergarten, it takes a lot less time to get these kids up to green than it does if they're in 3rd or 4th grade. And then for those students who are really far behind or who are really struggling, this might be your student with dyslexia. They might need tier 3 interventions, which will be generally a smaller group with more time and more intensity. So that just to give you an idea of how schools think about instruction within a multi-tiered system of support. I am repeating myself probably way too often, but again, screeners are predictive, and they indicate the odds of a student being okay in the near future. And being at risk does not mean that a student won't learn to read. Being at risk does not mean that a student is necessarily dyslexic. If you remember those charts I showed you at the beginning of Maryland reading scores, I remember I was in the senator's office, Senator Zucker. He sponsored the bill, and he looked at that and saw that about 60% of students were not proficient in reading. And he's like, are all these kids dyslexic? And it was like, no, they're not, because only maybe around 10% of students are dyslexic, but there are a lot of students who struggle with reading. So that's why this is not a dyslexia screening bill. It's a reading screening bill. So, let me see. So for school districts, I think this bill does 2 things. On the one hand, it looks at individual students and tries to find those students that need extra help. But on the other hand, this bill and screening can be very instructive for school systems, because we know that if a general tier 1 instruction should help 80% of the students should be reading proficiently, and only 20% or fewer should need supplemental reading instruction. So, we know that in most schools that's not the case. So what that tells school districts is that they need to look at their tier 1 reading instruction and try to think of how they can improve that instruction. So I think, honestly, to me, this is the most powerful part of this bill. It's not necessarily what we talked about, but this is the part that I think needs to be talked about now, as we are, as the Kerwin and the Blueprint for Maryland Future is looking at our schools creating students that are college and career ready. It all starts in kindergarten and 1st grade. So this is a place where the Ready to Read Act can really help our school systems in the state. And then the last thing that I wanted to talk about was what I thought should be improved with this legislation. And this is a big one for me. I argued with, I spoke in front of the state board about this when they were approving the regulations. When we originally wrote this bill, we had universal screening. So that's screening for every single student, even the ones who are high flyers. But every student in pre-K, kindergarten, and first grade. And that got shaved down to kindergarten. I think at a minimum, we should really be screening in kindergarten and first grade. Even better would be kindergarten, first grade, and second grade, because by screening universally, we're able to see how good your tier 1 reading instruction is. And if we don't do that, then we're missing that opportunity to improve our schools. So this is what I would like to see changed with the Ready to Read Act. And I'm happy to talk to anyone about this, because I feel pretty strongly about this one. So that is my presentation. And I guess if there are any questions, I'm happy to try to answer them.
Thank you. Thank you, Karleen, for such an informative presentation. And I got to tell you that there are several questions, some of them that are complex enough that we're going to try to give folks the ability to raise their own question. So I want to start with a light question, not really light, because to me, it's very serious. You talked about data reporting earlier in your presentation, and that it was disaggregated by district. Is race at all considered in this? Is there a disaggregation by race within this reporting? Yeah, could you share a little bit more about that?
There is not. A lot of it comes down to what can you get passed by the legislature. And that was one of those things, we wanted to at least be able to get data reporting by school. But when I said, things got amended, that was one of the things that went away. So now it's just by school district or by county. So that would be very interesting.
We are the Initiative for Literacy and Equity. And just as someone who's been a children's advocate for most of her career, there's not a system that exists that serves kids that I don't want to know these impacts, at a deeper level for particular young people, right?
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Diana Carrillo, she is the graduate assistant for this committee and for this work. She has captured some other questions for you, Karleen, and I'm just going to turn it over to Diana to take us forward.
Yeah, thank you, Karleen, for that presentation. So the first question is from Amy, and I will actually allow her to speak. That way she can present her question herself.
Okay.
Amy, are you with us? And if not, I'll go ahead and ask it.
Hi, thank you all so much. This was such a great learning experience. So I have a first and fourth grader, and I guess at the end of third grade, so my daughter who's in fourth grade, we do have that window where COVID really impacted her. And we have a strong suspicion, working on diagnosis for dyslexia for her now on a private level. But at the end of third grade, we've advocated for a lot of support for her. At the end of third grade, we received that paper saying your child would continue receiving intervention. And many of her screeners along the way have shown that need. Now, as she moves into fourth grade, she's only assessed using ORF and MAISE. And for a child with dyslexia, she has learned to compensate and do, somewhat well on those types of screeners because she can get through a bit of material. So now, because of that, and because she's not being assessed with some of those other like RAN and phonological tools anymore, she's basically kind of being dismissed from intervention. So my question was kind of what weight does that, paper, if you will, the Ready to Read Act paper that comes home, what weight does that hold as far as, phasing kids out of that just based on one other DIBELS report?
I'm not sure that I'm entirely able to answer that just because I'm not a psychologist. I'd be happy to, I guess, get your information and, ask someone else. I will say though that, so there's a difference between a screener, which is kind of like taking a kid's temperature and to see if there's an issue, and a real assessment to see if she's making progress. And so it would seem to me that she's, other than the ORF, she's really beyond the screener. She should be assessed with something else, more like a diagnostic type assessment to really look at where her weaknesses are and where the instruction needs to be. Because the screener is really to sort kids and identify those kids that need help. But, she's, I would say, beyond that. So I don't think you should be depending on a screener. If that's helpful. I know it's probably not, but that's the truth, because screeners are for a specific assessment purpose, and she would need something else.
Thank you, Karleen, and hopefully you can hear me better now. The next question is from Sandra, and it says, thinking of multilingual learners, I wonder if screeners are normed on multilingual learner populations and available in multiple languages or just in English. Same questions for the supplemental reading interventions.
So there are screeners specifically for in Spanish language. And some of our school districts are using those to screen students who are multilingual. Other than saying that, I think that as well is kind of beyond my scope of knowledge. I know that the Reading League is planning an event along with Mile, I think, in November, where we're going to talk about multilingual learners and how to work with them. I know it's an issue. I know that for schools that tend to be have a high population of students who are English learners, that those students tend to score poorly on the screeners. But I don't quite understand exactly why or what to do about it. So that's kind of like the next frontier, if I can say it that way.
Thank you again,
Be on
Karleen.
the lookout for something to happen in November that will hopefully answer your question with people who know a lot more about this than I do.
The next question is from Angie, and it says, regarding the screeners you showed examples of, do they cover comprehension as well, or are they focused more on foundational reading skills?
When they start off in kindergarten and first grade, they focus more on foundational skills. If you look at, say, like DIBELS or Acadians, they have what they call the ORF, which is the Oral Reading Fluency Measure. It's a 1-minute measure where the student has to read out loud, and the teacher checks to see how many words correct they get, which doesn't really, and then on Acadians, they ask retell questions afterwards. I don't know if they do on the new DIBELS. I think they don't. It doesn't really sound like a comprehension measure, but a student who is more fluent, who can read quickly and doesn't stumble over words, has better comprehension. Believe it or not, it's been shown to line up very well with strictly comprehension tests. So the ORF really is your comprehension measure, and the maze as well. The maze starts in 3rd grade, and the student is asked to read a passage and fill in, like there'll be words taken out and they have to fill in one of 3 words that makes the most sense. So that is as well as a comprehension measure. But those start a little bit later.
Okay, and we had one last question from Amy. You might have touched on it a little already. And it says, after screeners show deficits, what does the law require as far as timeline for how soon intervention happens, how often, who instructs, and what intervention is used?
So a parent needs to be notified within 30 days. And a student is supposed to be progress monitored within 30 days. So I would, in theory, that would mean that it has to happen. They need to start receiving intervention within 30 days or so. The law does not say specifically when the intervention has to happen. It also doesn't say specifically what intervention a student should receive. It might just be that the student gets a double dose of what they get in their tier 1. But we really can't, as in a law, say exactly what that intervention should be, simply because, kids are different and have different needs. So I don't think any law can have that specificity to it, unfortunately, but that's the way the law works.
I think that concludes all the questions that we had queued up. And gosh, what fascinating questions from fascinating people. There were a couple of people I wanted to acknowledge. I didn't have an opportunity before we got started. Laura Schultz is here. She's on our committee at the university, but I even have colleagues, Anna, who is a UMD faculty member. I missed the dean at Morgan State, Dean Prime, and I am a Morgan State alumnus, so I hate that she had to hop off prior to me acknowledging her, but also Eden from Delegate Solomon's office. So thank you for being here. Man, I think we've got folks in here that are running for mayor and working in the school systems. We're just grateful for all of you and all of your support. And very much thankful to Karleen for leading us through this discussion. I'm going to just share my screen for just a few minutes ago. Okay, well, let's acknowledge this comment from Jen. Or did we get your question, Sandra? Because it looks like there was just another one that was raised. If someone could confirm that we got the question. And
No.
No. Yeah, well, I'll read it. Let's answer this last question and then we'll continue our wrap up. Sandra says, wonder 2 things. What does the bill say about tier 1 in terms of time spent in the different components of literacy? She's kind of concerned that in some of the kinder classrooms that she's visiting, that teachers are focusing exclusively on foundations, skills without a focus on oral language and comprehension. And there are also essential components of literacy development. And what does that say about the professional development for teachers? Karleen, do you have some thoughts about that?
Well, the law does not say anything about tier 1. Again, there's only so much that you can put into a bill. That's kind of how Maryland does their legislation. What does it say about teacher prep and professional development? I think there's been a lot of professional development across the state on the science of reading, and hopefully teachers are learning about the importance of oral language development. And like I showed, the reading rope shows a lot of different components, and obviously in kindergarten and 1st grade There needs to be a certain amount of time and effort focused on those foundational skills, but we can't forget about the language comprehension part of the reading rope as well. So I hear you. And, we have room to grow and improve here in Maryland.
Thank
So,
you, Karleen. And part of why these questions are excellent, because our interest with Mile is at some point developing some type of policy priority around, what we take to the state legislature, what do we take to local school boards, or to the Department of Education, the Maryland Department. And so these questions are really helpful. And for me, as someone that hasn't been studying this so closely, and I haven't had a young person in school in a long time, to just really understand, what are the additional things that are needed. So thank you so much for your comments, your questions. Keep following us, because this is exactly what we're doing, trying to better understand how we can improve this for kids across systems. Let me share my screen really quickly. Other than thanking you for all for being here, I wanted to just draw your attention to the rest of our series. October the 11th, we're going to be hearing from Shamoya Gardner. She's the executive director at Strong Schools Maryland, and she's going to talk about the blueprint for Maryland's future. We're going to hear more about the science of reading from DJ Bulger, who is leading this Mile effort, and some others that perhaps he'll pull together on a panel. And then finally, one on how speech language pathologists identify dyslexia. And again, a colleague here at the University of Maryland will be giving some thoughts about that. Let me stop my share because it's not doing what I want it to do. Aha, here we are. And then I'll share one more time so that you can actually see Miss Shamoya Gardner, who will be with us next. Again, just a quick hour, and we'd love to have you if we can. Again, thank you so much. Thank you so much. This is rich. Your attention has just been appreciated, and just grateful for all of you. Hopefully we'll see you again. Diana, if you could really quickly though, drop in the chat for everyone who remains how to register for our next session, so they could do so right now today if they're interested.
Yes, the link has already been shared in the chat.
All right, perfect. Thank you, everybody. Be well.